As we all watch the horror unfolding in Gaza, there's one question that just cuts through all the noise, and it's a question that demands a real answer. How do we actually stop the genocide? We're going to dive into that because, frankly, finding a strategy that can actually work is the most urgent task there is.
So in this explainer, we're going to follow a 5-part roadmap based on the source material. We'll start with why the current approaches are failing, then we'll identify the one social force that might actually be able to stop the war machine, and finally, we'll lay out the kind of program that's needed to get it done.
All right, let's jump right in. The whole point here is to get past the endless cycle of headlines and the empty official statements to find a strategy that actually makes sense, a real lever for change in a world that feels completely powerless right now.
And look, this isn't just some academic question. With the death toll just climbing and the major world powers either helping the slaughter or just letting it happen, it's become crystal clear that the usual political and legal channels are a complete dead end. So what else is there?
Before you can find the right solution, you have to understand why all the other ones are wrong. We need to take a hard look at why the main strategies, appealing to governments, going to international courts, why they haven't just failed, but in a lot of ways are actually part of the problem.
Let's start with the big one. South Africa, taking Israel to the International Court of Justice. Now, around the world, this was praised as this huge moral stand. But if you look just a little bit closer at the government that brought the case, you find a really deep and, honestly, a pretty damning contradiction.
This right here really exposes the massive gap between words and actions. On the one hand, you have South Africa's public image, playing the hero for human rights at The Hague. But then, you look at the reality back home. While they're condemning violence over there, their own government is protecting South Africans who go fight for the IDF, and they're continuing to ship strategic resources, like coal, that literally power Israel's economy. This isn't just hypocrisy. It shows you where their real class interests are, something they made brutally clear when they massacred their own striking workers at Marikana.
And this behavior isn't just a random act of hypocrisy. According to the sources, it's a textbook example of something called bourgeois nationalism. What does that mean? Well, it's basically when the new ruling class in a country that was once a colony, like the ANC in South Africa, doesn't actually try to overthrow the global system that caused their problems in the first place. Instead, they just try to carve out a better deal for themselves within that same system. And that almost always leads them to betray the very people they claim to speak for.
And, South Africa isn't a special case here. This slide shows that it's the rule, not the exception. You can see the same exact pattern all across Africa. All these promises of national liberation, led by these kinds of parties, they all ended up with new ways of being dependent on imperialism. From Ghana to Egypt, it's the same story.
So, here's the bottom line from all this. Appealing to these governments, or their institutions like the UN or the ICJ, it's a trap. They aren't neutral referees. They are a fundamental part of the global capitalist system that is the root cause of all of this, of imperialism, of war, and of genocide.
Okay, so if all the official powers are a dead end, where do we look? This is where we have to identify a social force that's outside of that official system, one that has the real, actual power to step in and change things. It's the logical question, right? If you can't count on presidents, or courts, or nationalist leaders, then where is the real power? Who can actually reach in and grind the gears of this war machine to a halt?
And the answer our sources give is simple, it's direct, and it's powerful. The international working class. Now, it's really important to understand this isn't some moral appeal to the common man. It's a cold, hard, strategic calculation. It's about identifying a specific group of people who hold a uniquely powerful position in the world economy.
This quote here, which is actually talking about oil workers in Equatorial Guinea, really nails the core issue. The power of the working class isn't just about how many of them there are. It's about their strategic position. Workers produce everything. They run all the systems that make capitalism and its armies actually function.
So where is this power located? Well, it's in the key choke points of the global economy. I mean, just think about it. The people who load the ships, who build the weapons, who run the internet, who drive the trucks, they have their hands on the actual levers of the entire system. Without their work, the war machine literally cannot function.
But look, just having power and knowing how to use it are two totally different things. So that brings us to the next part. The question of program and leadership. How do you take this massive potential power of the working class and turn it into a conscious political force that can actually change the world?
So the sources lay out a very clear 4-point program to make this happen. First, political independence.
That means a complete break from all the political parties of the capitalist class. Second, you have to build a new, revolutionary leadership that is only focused on the interest of workers. Third, international unity, uniting workers across all borders against their common enemy. And finally, using their power through direct action, things like mass political strikes, to physically shut the whole war machine down.
And let's be absolutely clear about what this means. This program isn't about asking for change or trying to persuade the powers that be. It's about workers organizing themselves independently to directly take on and shut down the parts of the capitalist system that are fueling this genocide.
And this all leads us to the final section. Because the immediate fight to stop what's happening in Gaza is, when you get right down to it, impossible to separate from the fight against the thing that causes it in the first place, the global imperialist system.
It's like, you can't cure the symptoms if you don't get rid of the disease. This kind of genocidal violence isn't some mistake or a bug in the system. It's an extreme but logical outcome of a world system that's based on powerful countries dominating weaker ones and fighting each other over resources and control.
This slide reveals a parallel that is it's absolutely stunning and deeply disturbing. The basic ideologies behind apartheid South Africa and the Zionist state in Israel are structurally almost identical. They're both settler colonial projects. They both use a religious claim to justify taking the land. And most importantly, they are both driven by what's called the logic of elimination. This idea that to make the land secure for your people, the original inhabitants have to be removed, replaced, or just gotten rid of.
So, the conclusion that flows from that analysis is that the only way forward is through a strategy of uncompromising class unity. It means rejecting all the divisions of nation, ethnicity, or religion. The enemy of a worker in one country isn't a worker in another country. It's the capitalist class, both at home and abroad.
And if you apply that principle directly to this conflict, it means there's only one truly progressive path forward. And that's the unification of Arab and Jewish workers. They have to build a common fight against Zionism, against the corrupt Arab governments, and against the imperialist powers that arm and fund both sides to keep everyone divided and fighting.
So in the end, the sources argue that the only realistic program isn't about tinkering with the system we have. It's a revolutionary one. It's about replacing the whole system of competing nation-states that breeds these wars with a socialist federation that's based on international cooperation and democratic control.
And that leaves us with one final question. A question that really sums up the massive stakes of our time. The internal logic of imperialism is pushing the whole world toward a global war. The only thing that can stop it is the conscious, international, revolutionary movement of the working class. The question is, can that be built in time?